Okay, so we've shown how to list files. If we wanted to send into a directory, so let's say inside of the temp directory, I want to create a file. The way I get into the temp directory is I use the CD program. So CD, and then I give it the name of the place that I want to go into. There's two different ways, generally, that you can navigate into the folder. You can use an absolute path, or you can use a relative path. Generally speaking, you're going to use relative paths. So the way the relative pathing works is from this CD, I can type temp, and notice I'm just typing the name of the folder because I know I have direct access to it from where I am, right? You guys would agree, I have direct access. So if I type cd temp, you'll notice now my command prompt has changed, and it now shows me that I'm inside of that folder. Your command prompt may not change. It may not be designed to change and give you the folder that you're in. You might just have a command prompt that just remains exactly the same and it never gives you any feedback in terms of the directory. That again is like depending on the shell that you're using, depending on the environment that you're using to navigate your file system, you may or may not get a pretty printout of the folder that you're in. I would suggest if you have some time, you configure it to do that because it's much less common for you to get lost if you can see where you currently are. So it's just super beneficial to have that in place. So now that we're in the temp directory, if we do an ls, we should see there's nothing in there. It's an empty folder directory. So if I wanted to create a new file, I could do touch. Touch accepts more than one argument, so I could do file 1 txt, file 2.txt, file 3.txt. So now if I type ls, I should expect what?
All those to list almost the same way you type them, except not without the word touch.
Okay, but they'll be horizontal, they'll be in columns, and don't give very much information in that, so we could do ls minus la, and then see them listed. This again is more helpful in many cases when you have a lot of files. What do you think the rationale is to have them, again, in these columns by default and without padding the flag?
So you can see all the information behind it. Like, so you can see who owns it.
No, if we don't do that. So why do you think by default, without any additional flags?
To find the spelling of the file that you're looking for.
Right, but why would they do it horizontally, not vertically?
You know, to put as many of them on the screen in front of you as possible so that you can find the one you're looking for.
Okay, so the important part of what you stated was to get as many as you can in the limited amount of space. Because if we just list them, the part over here to the right-hand side is wasted space, and we could fill all of that information up with a bunch of files. So to make it efficient, that's the reason why ls doesn't, by default, use a listing like you might see in other operating systems. Wink, nudge, nod. So in Windows, when you do a dir, you're going to see just a listing, and it spills a bunch of information. But that's okay, because in Windows, you're going to be using your mouse to scroll, right? And you're going to scroll up in the terminal. But when you're at the shell, you're most likely not going to want to be doing scrolling. You want to keep your hands on the keyboard. So you want to have that immediate feedback in the sense of if I type the shortest command ls, that's going to be the default command with no flags. It's going to do its job to give us as much information as it can in a minimal amount of space. So again, it's intentional. Some people are thrown off by that. They're thrown off by the fact that when I type ls, I only get these columns of information and it doesn't seem very useful, but it's designed hopefully to be more useful. Now that we know we're inside of the temp folder, we don't have access to our original README file. To get back to our original README file, we have a couple different ways to navigate to it. So we could type cd to change directory, and then we could use the double dot, which will take us up one directory and take us to the place where we were before, hopefully. In addition, instead of going just up one directory, we could give it a not a relative path, but the specific path to where we wanted to go. In my case right now, I'm in my own home folder, and so the shortcut for the home folder is this tilde. Then I could further describe that I want to go up one folder by just using slash and an example. And this will do the same thing as if I was right now to type cd space dot dot. It would take me to the same location. So that's the difference between like absolute paths or relative paths when you're at the command line. So when I hit enter, I'll be up one folder, I can do an ls again, and I can see there's a temp folder below. To get back into the temp folder, cd temp, and I could do cd dot dot, and that would take me back up one folder and into the example folder. Okay, so rather than you guys trying to ride along while I'm doing this, I would just suggest that you just try and follow along, watch what I'm doing. You'll have plenty of time to practice this. So no need to ride along. So from where I am right now, if I do an ls, I can see that there's this other directory, and there is another kind of a handy way to jump around. And when you're CDing, you're going to most likely use either the ... to go back up a folder, the CD to the specific path that I'm in. Like again, I could go CD and then I could do a slash. And then in my shell, if I start typing EX and then hit tab, it will autocomplete the rest of whatever that the closest suggestion is. Again, autocomplete by tabbing is going to be the most efficient way typically to complete when you're searching at the command line, rather than trying to spell things out. Because if you try and spell things out and you accidentally misspell something, you're going to find out, like let's see if I accidentally type TMP and then hit enter, I get an error message, right? And that could just be because I fat fingered it and I forgot the correct spelling. However, if I type CD, then tilde, then slash, and then E, and then hit the tab, it'll complete example, hit the T, hit the tab, it'll complete the example, and then I can hit enter. Cool? So, I'm going to CD back up a folder. I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to call it temporary. Do an ls. So now I have the temp folder and I have the temporary folder. So what do you think happens if I type CD temp?
Go
But if I hit tab right now, what do you think happens?
fill it out.
Fill it out or stay the same? Because there's temp, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's gonna be confused. It's gonna ask you which one you want, right?
Maybe.
I would suspect if you hit enter, you'd go into temp. If you hit tab, you'll get temporary.
Okay, so I'm going to hit tab. I got a bell.
Ah, both.
So the bell is, when you hit that autocomplete, the bell is, hey, I've got more than one thing that matches this, so I can't autocomplete it. And you will often, when you're in an environment, you hear coders, you'll hear the bell happening a lot of times, because you'll hear people like hitting the button a couple times. And that might be because they want to use the autocomplete, and when I hit tab a couple times, it'll actually give me those choices and it'll cycle through them.
Can you use the arrow key to pick them?
Well, right now I'm just hitting tab, and mine is just automatically auto-completing and going through all of them.
Okay.
But the idea is you will sometimes hear people hit that in like multiple times. You'll hear that bell, and it's just people like hitting it a second time so they can actually get the, right? They hear the bell, they know, okay, now I have some options. Pick one of the options, and then you can go into that folder. One other thing that's kind of nice is if you CD to a specific location, so let's say I CD to example, and then I go directly to another directory. So if I CD, let's say, example temp. Okay, if I type CD dash, not a tilde, but dash, this doesn't take me up or down. This takes me back to the last place that I CD'd from, or the last CD that I did. So CD dash takes me back to example because that was the last place that I directly CD'd to. So it just repeats the last place that you CD'd to. Like it repeats the last CD command in essence. This is useful if you're in one place in your file system. Let's say you're in a really long URL, and then you have to CD back up a bunch of folders, so you type the CD command a bunch of times and you get to another location. Then you want to go back to a very deeply nested folder. What you can do is CD once to that deeply nested folder, then you can type the CD dash button and it'll take you back to like the last place. It's kind of like on your remote control for your TV, the last button, right? Think of the dash as like CD dash is like going to press the last button. Take you back to the last place that you CD'd. So that means that you don't have to repeat really long CD commands. You can type the first really long CD command, then the second really long one, and then you can just use the dash to keep going back and forth between the two. And you can just CD dash goes one, CD dash goes back to the other one. It'll be a little bit easier for you to kind of flip-flop between the last two, right? So that's kind of like the last button for CD. Okay,